Hello and welcome to another edition of Oxwide, broadcasting live to you today from Pinewood House. Later in the programme, we'll be welcoming Rachel Townsend to the Trust, who alongside Debbie Wheddon will be telling us why it's vital for everyone to fill in their staff survey this year. And speaking of vital things, we've got Jane Wells with us to tell us how this year's flu campaign is going so far and why it's important for as many of you as possible, as many of us as possible, to be vaccinated. And this week is NHS Fraud Awareness Week, and I'm delighted to say we'll be joined by Charlie Medley from KPMG about the great work they're doing to protect the NHS. First, as always, I wanted to give you a few quick updates, and we'll start, as ever, this year with COVID-19. I think there's two things I wanted you to be aware of at the minute. One is that we're about to start rolling out a programme of staff testing. And you'll have read about this in the papers, and what we're doing is ramping up the ability of all of us who work at the Trust, particularly those in clinically facing roles, to get yourself tested regularly to make sure that we pick up when people are showing signs of COVID-19 or are testing positive for it, and make sure that they can then be given the right support to manage that in the workplace to avoid any infections and outbreaks. We'll be giving you a lot more information on that shortly, but members of staff, particularly those of you in clinical settings, need to be very aware that this is coming rapidly, and that at some point in the next few days we'll be letting you know exactly what you need to do to make sure you can do your 2 tests a week. That'll help protect you, protect your family, and protect our patients from the spread of COVID-19. And it's been great in the last few weeks to see that some of the restrictions that the government's put in place are starting to slowly have an effect on the numbers and see them ticking down. I also know that, like me, lots of you have been reading the news about the vaccines that we've got on the horizon. We now have one vaccine that's published the first of its phase 3 results, and there's some really positive stuff in there. And there's 2 others at least that are coming down the tracks that look as though they'll be very strong candidates as well. And what does this mean for us? Well, what it means is that while we've got a tough winter ahead of us, there is now some really genuine good news, evidence-based good news in sight, and that at some point within weeks or months, we'll be able to offer members of staff and some of our most vulnerable patients access to a vaccine. And that in due course, what this vaccine means is that we'll be able to control and manage the spread of COVID-19 and get us back to a position where actually we're able to look at this as one of a number of, dangerous, unpleasant infectious diseases, but something that rather than our whole lives being dominated with it, we'll learn to find ways to live with and manage it as we think about whether there's some possibility of elimination in the future. But for now, the vaccine, the trial results look good that we've seen. There'll be more to come for us to understand really what they mean. But this is positive news, and it's right that we should all feel a sense of optimism that this looks like being a virus that can be managed and controlled by the use of vaccines, and where we can offer people protection. So for the meantime, there's absolutely nothing we can do in terms of releasing the restrictions we need. We need to remember hands, face, space. Wash your hands, cover your face when you're out in public or walking around our buildings, and make sure you stay away from each other. We know how the disease spreads. We've known that all along, and it's very predictable in terms of its spread, particularly when you're away from the patient-facing areas, when you're in staff rooms, you're in handovers. Make sure you follow the guidance and do what you need to do to protect yourself and your family, because COVID is very much still with us. But there is, next spring, there's positivity on the horizon. When the weather's getting better and the buds are coming out and it's sunny outside, we're going to have the vaccine really rolling out. And this is, I think, the first really, really good news we've had in quite a long time when we're talking about COVID. So lots of reasons to be optimistic there. And now flu, of course, though, is something that we've had a vaccine for many years, and the staff flu vaccination programme is out there rolling out. I've had my jab myself a couple of weeks ago. I'm very glad I have. As have my children, my mum and dad, my wife. We're all making sure we do our part to protect ourselves and those that we care for and those that we love. And we've got with us Jane Wells, our Director of Nursing. And Jane, give us a bit of an update on how we've got off to the start this year in the flu campaign at Oxleas.
Thank you very much, Matthew. We've made a great start this year with our flu campaign. As of Friday, we have vaccinated 1,122 staff. That's 38% of our staff altogether. We've got some of the directorates absolutely steaming ahead. For example, the learning disabilities are already at 65%. That's brilliant. And Bromley are at 43%. The remaining directorates are averaging around 35% and still have some consent forms to put in from the Jabathon last week. Prisons are doing really well this year. They got their vaccinations slightly later than the other directorates, but they actually only have to give 217 more vaccinations to get to 100%. So that is really great news. I'm really grateful to everyone for supporting the campaign. It's especially important this year because we don't want anybody to have to catch COVID-19 and flu. And flu is a really, really nasty illness. It's not just 2 to 3 days in bed. It can actually have some pretty nasty complications. And for our most vulnerable people, if they catch it, it can result in hospital admissions and can be very serious and potentially quite deadly. So we've got plenty of vaccines. We really do encourage people to have it. It's not a live vaccine. You can't catch flu from it. You can, however, spread flu and be asymptomatic. So it's really important, particularly for healthcare workers, to have their vaccination. And you do need to have a jab every year because the viruses change every year and the World Health Organization try to get the best match. And so this year, more important than ever. We've had jabathons, we've been having roaming clinics, we've been having static clinics. But if anybody is having any trouble accessing a jab, please email me on jane.wells1@nhs.net or any of my colleagues, and we'll make sure that we support you to have vaccination. We are considering putting on some sites in Kent. I've been speaking to my counterparts at Kent Community and other sites within Kent to see whether people working at home might benefit from that. And also, if you're able to go to your pharmacist and they've got flu vaccines available and you can pay, you can have that reimbursed in your expenses. So we're trying to make it as simple as possible. But we do have lots and lots of vaccines available, and we'd really like to make sure that you can have them as soon as possible. So please do get in touch if you're not able to access through your peer coordinators who are giving the flu vaccine or the roaming clinics or static clinics. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. And it's worth noting how much attention there's been to the COVID vaccine and how much hope there is around this. Here for the flu, we've got a vaccine that we know works, that we know is well tolerated, and that we know is available for our staff. So there's no reason, is there, for people not to have this, and they need to make sure they're doing everything they can to get access to it.
Definitely.
Okay. Well, look, well done to those directorates that are doing tremendously well this year. You know, ALD were mentioned there, and Bromley and others who are really excelling and getting out there. Great to see prisons as well. For those of you that are still not quite there, you know, have a look on the Ox. There's plenty of information available, and talk to Jane and her team about how you can get yourself vaccinated. Or if you're not able to for good reasons, you can put in a return that tells us why, and that all helps us with our numbers and our understanding. Jane, was there anything else you wanted to add on flu vaccines? Or in the meantime, the team are thinking about COVID vaccines, aren't they?
Yes, we're starting to turn our thoughts to COVID at the moment. We don't actually have much information on it, but we know it's going through the final stages, and it's anticipated that when it does come on stream in probably weeks rather than months now, that there'll need to be a 7-day gap between the flu vaccine and the COVID vaccine. So if people can have their flu vaccines as soon as possible, it would be much better in the long term.
And I think actually I'm right, because I mentioned about the phase 3 trial results earlier. They've published press releases based on those trial results, but we haven't yet seen all the results published as raw data, have we? So I think there's just those important safety steps to take before we can give people confidence, but we want them to be able to do that. And I certainly think this is a potentially really exciting development for us over the next few weeks, but it will be a big job for your team, busy as they already are. Yes,
and I'm sure we'll all be playing our part in the LIDA system as well, so it'll be exciting.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much, Jane. So that's an update on the flu campaign, and at some point we'll have a flu and a COVID vaccination campaign running, quite possibly this side of Christmas. And I think if you told us that a couple of months ago, we'd have been delighted at that prospect of some kind of end to this year's control measures around the pandemic coming in sight. Now, we're joined today by Charlie Medley. KPMG are our auditors. They work with the Trust and have done for a number of years, just to make sure we've got that independent eye on how we're carrying out our business as an NHS Trust, spending taxpayers' money to try to get the best possible care for our patients. And this week is Fraud Awareness Week. So, Charlie, can you tell us a bit about Fraud Awareness Week and your role at KPMG in supporting Oxleas?
Yes, thank you. So I'm one of the counter-fraud specialists at KPMG and have worked with Oxleas in the past, as well as a number of other specialist acute and mental health providers for almost 10 years now, and lead the continued development of our counter-fraud for the public sector. And I'm standing in for Jack Stapleton today, who is your lead nominated counter-fraud specialist. So over the years, Fraud Awareness Week has really grown into what's now an internationally recognised event to really focus on fraud and how we can prevent it. Because unfortunately, it is a huge problem. For the public sector in the UK alone, it's estimated to cost over £50 billion annually. And globally, if it was its own economic sector, it would be the largest growing sector in the world. Now, the NHS has always been a great ambassador for Fraud Awareness Week, whether that's through the work that gets done locally, like events like this to really raise the profile of the work we do, or tying into the NHS Counter-Fraud Authority's awareness campaigns. We do tirelessly work to raise awareness on the issue. For those of you on social media, you can follow and like and subscribe to the hashtag NHS Fraud to get all the latest updates.
And what can our staff do, Charlie, to help prevent fraud in the workplace?
Yeah, so you hear the phrase that staff are our greatest asset a lot, but when it comes to preventing and identifying fraud, that's never been more true. You are the lifeblood of the trust, keeping it running effectively and efficiently, and by working together, being clear on what and how we need to carry out all of our roles, whether that's individually or collectively in the teams, we can prevent fraud from happening. Whether that's making sure we're taking the time to properly review and challenge a timesheet, for example, or being open and honest about some of the gifts or hospitality we might be offered and received. In identifying fraud, you collectively are the eyes and ears across the trust. So we always ask that you remain alert and aware. And if you do see something that looks suspicious, please do not hesitate to report it, and always make sure that you're not actually trying to investigate it yourself.
And you asked there, Charlie, for, if people feel their suspicions are raised, that they should take action. What are some of the kind of things people should look out for as signs of possible fraud?
Yeah, so there's two things that every single fraud has in common, and they're dishonesty and then the intention to make a gain or cause a loss. And dishonesty is subjective. We all have our own judgments and experiences. And actually, there is no better yardstick to judge whether something has happened dishonestly. And the reason that intention is so important is that you don't have to have been successful for fraud to have occurred. It's all about someone's intention and their behaviour. And because of these two really broad definitions, unfortunately, fraud can materialise pretty much anywhere. But at the moment, with COVID-19, unfortunately, one of the things we're seeing a real surge in is false sickness. And it is a huge issue for organisations, with a thankfully dishonest minority taking advantage, as is things like inappropriate access and use of things like PPE. So if there were two areas and two themes I'd like people to be aware of and consider, it's that dishonesty and intention, and then how it applies to things like false sickness and PPE.
And what we're not doing is, as you said, we're not asking people to investigate this stuff themselves. We're asking them to have a look on the Ox, and on your screen now you can see a link where there's more information about that, and you'll be able to find it in the news section as well with a link to that. We don't want people investigating stuff themselves, but if their suspicions are raised, do talk to your line manager or talk to somebody appropriate and raise those concerns, and we can have a look into it. So thanks very much to Charlie there and his colleagues at KPMG who are supporting the Trust and the NHS in making sure that we're getting the best value for our money and able to deliver the best possible care that we can. And so our third piece today, we're joined by Debbie Wheddon and by Rachel Townsend, who Debbie's been with the Trust, I think, for over a year now, Debbie, and Rachel, though, for much less time. I'll introduce Rachel in a minute. But Debbie, I'll come to you in a minute. This has been a really interesting year, hasn't it, for our workforce? There's been so much for us to deal with. We've had to deal with COVID. And then we've had to deal with things like Black Lives Matter that's really opened up a conversation about the experience of people working in the NHS. And what we've done through dealing with the pandemic is we've lost a lot of that sense of connection in the workplace, and we've had to adapt to different ways of working, the kind of way we're having this conversation. And something we need to look for the future and to help us all see our way through this is that sense of trust between us as members of an organisation that wants to make this a great place to work, but also to think about that hope. Both things like the hope that we'll have a vaccine soon that will help us adapt to ways of working around COVID, but also the hope that we're an organisation that will listen to what people's told us and will change. And I hope people are starting to see us demonstrating that commitment. But with that in mind, Debbie, can you tell us a bit about some of the work we're doing at the minute to try to make Oxleas the best possible place to work it can be?
Absolutely, Matthew. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. There has been so much going on. I think it's been a really challenging year for all of us. And one thing that we're really keen to do is encompass all of that in quite an ambitious but really all-encompassing cultural change programme, which is what we're working on at the moment. So for us, it's about building on Oxy's strengths and the things that we do every single day really, really well, but also continue to make improvements for us to make sure that Oxy's is a great place for everybody to work. So that comes across a number of different strands, and I think everybody will have heard of Building a Fair Oxleas, which is one of the key strands that we've got running through that cultural programme. But there are other kind of key priorities for us across our focus, and there's four main ones. The main one is obviously looking around and looking after our people, making sure that everybody is feeling supported, be that in their well-being, their setup, etc. Making sure people feel a sense of belonging in not only in the NHS but also Oxleas. Looking at how can we work in new ways. So is that through agile, flexible working? Is it through using different technology like we have over the last few months to deliver our care in different ways? And finally, about how do we grow and set ourselves up for the future? And that is about investing in skills, looking after kind of CPD, as well as kind of changing the way that we do things to meet the change of patients' needs and the demand on the services. And it's with all of that in mind that I'm absolutely over the moon that Rachel joined us 6 weeks ago. It's probably been a baptism of fire, but we have literally got so much that we've got that we really want to do, and she's a key part in bringing that all to life for us.
So Rachel, you've joined us from Imperial, haven't you? Tell us a bit about what it's been like joining a new trust in the middle of the circumstances we're in, and tell us a bit about your role.
So thanks, Matthew, and thanks, Debbie, for the welcome. And Jane, I've had a really great conversation with Jane as well. And hello to everybody that's streaming in. It's a real pleasure to be able to say hello to everybody and to hopefully come out and see you, which is kind of the kind of stuff I like to do as part of this role. But I think, as Matthew has alluded to, it's a really interesting time to join any organisation. I think anybody that has joined an organisation in any capacity over the last 10 months can testify it feels a bit odd. I think odd in the sense that if particularly you're in a function where most of the things are now moved to virtual, it's kind of a bit strange in terms of actually being able to meet and greet your colleagues. But actually, over the last 6 weeks, I've met lots of lovely people, great people across Oxleas. I think it helped to quiet the ambiguity that was internal, that I was thinking, God, Rachel, are you sure you wanted to move jobs in the middle of a pandemic? But actually, what has really come through for me in the last 6 weeks is actually a lot of the ethos of the organisation. I've been quite overwhelmed by actually how people are willing to speak to you and actually say hi and go out of their way. And how actually people genuinely have an interest in actually how we can build an organisation that has the people at its heart. And so for me in this role, which is all about people and developing people to be the best they can be, but also looking at the systems, the structures and the policies that support, or as we all know it, can sometimes hinder us from doing our best. It's been a real nice 6 weeks in terms of meeting people virtually. I think for me, the key thing and the reason why I joined was because it feels like Oxleas is in a really unique place where actually we genuinely, well, for me, it genuinely feels like we're about to embark on some change. But actually the change is based on the voice of staff members and actually wanting to hear how we can make Oxleas a great place to work and feel for ourselves, but also for the patients that we deliver care for. And so for me, that's really unique because a lot of the organisations I've joined have maybe been on that journey and then come back. But it seems like the ground is fertile for some great stuff to happen.
Thanks, Rachel. And so people can look forward to hearing more from you about your role supporting us in OD. And, I suppose it's, lots of us, our preferable work style is to go out and see people face to face. We've got other ways of doing it this year. And it's really important we take the time to think about how we make those connections and think about the experience of working here. A really important part of that, and I think Debbie, you'll back me up on this, is we need to hear from people through the staff survey, don't we? The staff survey is still open and we want people to respond, don't we?
Absolutely. And for those of you that haven't had a chance to have your say yet, the reminders landed in your inbox this morning. We've got 2 more weeks, so please do. And I think the bit that I really wanted to kind of reiterate is the programme of work that we're working at the moment was shaped from last year's feedback, as well as the rich feedback that we received from things like the networks, our staff assemblies, and every other survey that we've asked. We know there's a hell of a lot going on at the moment, and it's easy to kind of lose those emails in the middle of your inbox because we're asking you to do a lot of different things. So we really do recognise that, but we really want you to kind of help have that voice, because it's reflecting on what we've done well, on areas that you still want us to focus on. That means that we can really jointly as an organisation shape what our work plan looks like moving into 2021 and 2022. So it's not too late, it's out there. Please do kind of have your say.
Yeah, and just to emphasise, from the point of view of the executive and the board, the responses that come back through the kinds of conversations we've had this year about all kinds of different things, but also the information that comes through the staff survey, it's really helpful to us. It tells us about what it's like for you working for the trust. It tells us what we're not getting right. It also tells us where we're doing really well, so we can celebrate the good stuff and tackle and try to put right the things that need to be fixed. If you don't have your say, it makes it harder for us to do that. So I'd really encourage you, even in the midst of everything we're doing, to take that 10 minutes to find that email and to say what it's like for you this year. You know, we need to hear the truth of your experience here, because that's the only way we learn as an organisation. We listen, we learn, and we can change and improve off the back of that. So look, thank you very much for everyone who's joined us today. Thanks to Jane for telling us about the flu vaccine programme. Get your flu jab done if you haven't done it yet. It protects you, it protects your family, it protects the people we care for. We've heard from Charlie there about Fraud Awareness Week. Have a look on the Ox. We can all play our part in making sure that people aren't cheating the NHS out the resources we deliver. And it's our tax money that goes into it. It's our money, they're our resources, and it's all of our duty to make sure that it's spent wisely. And thanks very much to Debbie and Rachel there. Go away, do your staff survey. So think about that, staff survey and the flu jab and the Fraud Awareness Week stuff. You know, if you'd like to join us for a future episode of Oxwide, do drop us a line at the email address on your screen now. And everything on discussed today can be found on the Ox. And there's also a quick reminder that our annual members meeting takes place this Thursday afternoon. It'll be an online event, and details of how to watch and get involved will be coming to you via email as well as on the Ox, so watch out for that. But until next time, thank you and goodbye.